tomorrow. So our goals. Go ahead, read them for me, Alex.
Understand why we insist on independence each and every day in all of our schools. Understand your key levers in supporting the literacy program, including be able to coach them to the following key levers: the IR launch, conferring with readers, tracking progress, guided reading. We'll do a whole session on this, smiley face. Understand the expectations for leaders and teachers around supporting the literacy program.
So by noon, we should be able to say we are able to coach through each of those key levers. So that's the IR launch that all teachers will be doing. So how are they going to teach those small skills that you brought up, Kate? How are we going to conference with readers? What's our theory on that? How do you do it? How do you track that? How do we track progress in general with reading? And then how do you lead a guided reading session? And during that session in particular, I want you to pay attention to what's different than what you previously understood about guided reading, because I think that'll answer some of the questions that you brought up in the parking lot. So our agenda. First, we're going to talk about why reading. And we always talk about how important talking about the why is, but I feel really passionately that even though I know everybody in this room believes in independent reading, it's still important for us to be incredibly clear as a collective force about why independent reading and reading in general is so important to us at our public schools. And this is something that I'm going to need your help. You're going to need to carry this to your team and your teachers every single day. We're going to learn how reading is the first thing to go in a lot of schools. And we're going to have to actually make that the opposite in our schools. That's going to be the first thing that happens and the first thing that we hold true every single day in our schools. So, why independent reading? In order to understand why independent reading, I actually want to show you kind of the status of the state of Tennessee. I always am looking for statistics and data on reading and college persistence, and I always feel like it's outdated. It's not like our kids, right? And I wanted to find stuff that was about us or about Tennessee. And so I actually stumbled upon this really awesome report that the Tennessee State Department of Education wrote.
Can we click it?
Can I? Does it work?
I don't know.
Hey.
There you go.
What up? Okay. So the Department of Education wrote this report about the status of reading, and I can send it out later. It was fascinating. It was written in February of 2016, so just a few short months ago, and it basically, spoiler alert, leads us to understand that kids are not doing well in reading in Tennessee. And I was the thoroughness of the report was really impressive by the state, but the findings were just heartbreaking. So we're going to look at some of those things. And again, we're doing this so we understand where we're at as a state and what we need to do differently. So we're not part of this report. We cannot be someone that we report on. Our kids are not on grade level. That can never be our children. Oops. Well. All right, so here's some stats I found in the report. So less than half of students in Tennessee on a third grade assessment are proficient in reading. So that's only in third grade. That's the first time they take their state assessment thus far with how Tennessee has tested. In terms of subgroups of students, we've got 30% of students who are Black, Hispanic, or Native American are proficient in reading. So that's even lower than the average of the state. ELL learners, students with disabilities, or economically disadvantaged students are far below those numbers and showing far less proficient numbers. So just looking at this, how does this make you feel about the state of reading in Tennessee? Go ahead.
I think it's particularly jarring because our kids are starting off so far behind. In third grade, they're already so far behind.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that over time that probably compounds on itself. So seeing the third grade data in particular is really troubling.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Looking at the right side statistics, I think a lot of the stereotype around reading is that only the kids who struggle economically or are in a subgroup of students are the ones that we should focus on or that are going to be below reading, but that is not indicated in this. It means that we all have a huge problem.
it does show that there's a tremendous gap, right? Like it's not just that everyone is below a 1 If you have several different subsections, 20 percentage points below, then that means that there's theoretically roughly a 40% gap that's causing that.
This should make you really angry. Like, this data is pathetic. I did not have time to dive into Mississippi. I'm going to find it for you all, but it's lower. Like, having taught in Mississippi, I guarantee it's lower. And, like, this is unfair. Like, no child should be subject to an educational system or a school that produces this data, and so we cannot have this happen.
Even like proficiency is not even like on track.
It's particularly
This is based on the TCAP. This is based on the TCAP.
So proficiency is not enough. It should be even higher than that.
Yeah. You should feel some like rage and like anger right now. Here's the number. This one is like one statistic that like kind of drove me the craziest throughout the whole report. 3% of students who are below basic eventually move up to proficient. Only 3. At one point, and I was like, this can't be possible, so I might need to like go back and read this. They said 126 students they saw, like in like the sampling they did, moved from below basic to proficient. So I'm not sure if that can't be statewide, like that cannot be, but if it is, like that's like actually the most troubling thing I've read about.
Proficiency rates always, in both MAT and ELA, decline as years go on.
Well, let's talk about that. So, students who start off in 3rd grade at proficient drop. Advanced rates dropped dramatically from 3rd to 5th grade. And like, so someone brought this up earlier in our discussion. We also have to target readers who are on grade level or above. Like, currently, as a state, we are not doing that. And the repercussions are students are losing investment in reading. They're falling behind in reading. I'm sure that high school teachers, you guys can talk about like what that looks like for students who are older. Troubling across the board, right? Ryan, I cut you off. Do you have anything else to add? Sorry.
The line's perfect.
Yeah. And so 1 out of 5 students who earned a proficient score in 3rd grade ELA dropped down to basic in 5th grade. Among 8th graders reading below grade level, only 8% are deemed actually college ready. And the college ready like standards are not super high, in my opinion. So like 8% is really troubling, considering that like it's about like some coursework and just being like decent but not like advanced and like really being able to persist through college.
I'm even surprised that it's even 8%. If you're not reading, if you're reading below grade level, how could you possibly become?
Yeah, right. And so if that isn't troubling enough, this is the annual salary for students who are unable to persist or enroll in a college and receive a college graduation degree. And so that's below the poverty line. And it is obviously like, if this is to happen to our students, like think about their life choices, things they'll have access to. Based on all of this data, what are we feeling about like the state of reading in Tennessee? Or how are we feeling about the state of reading in Tennessee?
I think, like, to your point earlier, it doesn't, my person seems to always feel angry, but I also just feel like very urgent that sometimes reading data, it feels like slow to see growth, or it feels like pretty like arduous work to move a kid into reading level, but like we have to maintain our like laser focus and urgency on this because the problems, as we see over time, just compound. And to your point, like the incredible deficits that we see in some of our transfer ninth graders are not improving. Like kids who cannot read in the ninth grade who have gone through the public education system have been passed along and who come to us with no idea that they can actually read.
I also think about getting the parents involved as quickly as possible. So I think if you are this number and you are used to being this number and you are unaware of what's going on, parents aren't as likely to read with their scholar at home. But I think that if we can get them as angry as we are in seeing this, then it can also spark this idea of like what they can do at home with their students.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking of like that 3% number. I'm like curious, like what is the percentage of kids at our school who are in the below basic, and knowing that like we have to like crush that number, like
Mhm.
that cannot be true at our schools. And so it's kind of like this like justified rage, but also this like excitement to be like, I will never see that number at our school. Like we will crush 3%.
And I'll say from someone who's looked at this
data for a number of years at our schools, like we aren't much better. We're not at 3%, but we're not at 100 either. And that's really unfair. And so this is the
year where that's going to happen for those kids. That's why like all of our student supports people are working with academic team. That you are the academic team. We've got to work together to solve that issue. It's a collective issue. So, Macy?
I was just gonna say, I think the thing that kills me is sometimes is like helping kids love reading is actually, I would say, like one of the easiest things that teachers can do and learn to get good at like the most basic level. And so the fact that like across schools there are just adults who are like choosing not to get better at it, which doesn't really take that many resources or hours of practice too. And that is always very like just very upsetting to me.
Yeah. So, summary of this report and our discussion. As a state, we're behind, and as multiple states, we're behind reading across all grades. And the negative repercussions go far beyond test scores. They're impacting the health of students. They're impacting future jobs, income, basically the whole child and their whole future. Like, reading is the current problem that our state is facing, but it is also the solution to the problem. And that's like the mindset we have to go into the next 3 days, but also like the year. If we're going to solve any academic gaps, it starts with teaching kids how to be excellent readers. This was the most upsetting thing I saw. So this is how they would start off the report. By any measure, too many children in Tennessee struggle to read. Correct. We all agree on that. Here's their goal. 75% of Tennessee third graders will be proficient in reading by 2025. By 2025, 75% of kids will be proficient. And we saw that data about what happens to third graders. So like you're going to get 75% of kids here, then what's going to happen to them in fifth grade? And then what about those kids that Kate brought up who aren't even being served already?
And what about all the kids who are in the schools between now and 2025, when we know the answer is something that can be implemented tomorrow?
Mm-hmm. A decade of children. So we're not going to let that happen. We're going to get 100% of our kids to become lifelong readers who are on or above grade level. And we're going to do it by coaching our teachers in a really smart way and investing our students in loving reading. So I want you to independently reflect, why do we believe in reading at our public schools? Go ahead and you can write that down on your notes. Oops. No. Click happy. So exciting. All right, so you've reflected on why independent reading. I want to show you like an analysis that the state did of their like how Tennessee and schools in general are teaching reading. This is something that I'm really glad they put in the report as someone who loves reading and loves teaching reading. I've actually experienced this and experienced kind of like the mindset that this report brings out about how to teach reading. So let's take a look at it. Eric, do you mind reading it out loud for us so people in the back can see it?
At the 3 to 5 level, students spend relatively little time reading during school literacy class. In grades 3 through 5, TNTP researchers found that students spent very little time actually reading. Only 34% of student time was spent reading in each lesson, and only just over half the text that teachers used for their lessons were at an appropriate level of complexity for the grade level. Lessons themselves did not push students to engage with the words on the page. Most questions focused on recall of information rather than requiring students to return to the text to examine its structure, concepts, ideas, and vocabulary.
When I was a reading teacher, I once had someone come into my classroom and give me the feedback that too often when they came in, kids were reading. That's the point of reading, is to read. Obviously, like it's funny almost because it's like so obvious, but like it's not obvious because this is the way that it's been done across states, not just Tennessee. I mean, it was absolutely true for me in Mississippi, but it's across the country. What's wrong with the way that the current kind of literacy program is being run? Like, just shout it out. All the things about here that are wrong.
I mean, just through experience and anecdote, the remaining percentage of time is most likely an adult talking, which has very little to do with reading.
In the book, this person talks about how teachers could spend an incredible amount of time doing things excited about a book or doing multiple projects about a book or group work about a book rather than just reading the book.
Nothing about it is rigorous, and so it's not actually pushing students to develop new skills. They're just like, to like bring it back to peak, they're just like practicing the same thing. They're never going to improve if they aren't actually being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
Also, probably super boring. If for like upwards of 60% of the class, you're doing something that's not reading or listening.
Yeah.
And the time you are, you guys recall, which is also part of the role.
Yeah. Why would you want to read? Like, why would our students want to grow from like below basic to basic or basic to proficient? Like, I would not want to go to reading class if this were the case. How does this align or does it not align to our vision as it stands?
One thing that doesn't align is like how students are not even seeing like grade level text. I think one thing we're doing great is like you see things on your grade level, below your grade, or and at your level, whatever that may be. And
We're also demanding students to use the text. Anytime they tell you something, I think this, why? And they have to go back to the text to give you evidence.
When you think about, we've like used the phrase in the past in organization of differentiation, what that looks like. And independent reading is the ultimate differentiation.
Mm-hmm. Our program should be the opposite of this. We should never this should never reflect us. If this ever is happening in your school, it should be immediately red flag. Like, this is not how we teach reading. We do not teach reading through talking. We do not teach reading through worksheets. We teach reading through reading. That's the point of the program. And so everything that we talk about today is going to be geared at like aspects of teaching reading. It's not everything. We're still going to have to do more trainings. We're still going to have to learn more and teach more. But it's going to get at like the things that I would say are like the key drivers of a quality reading program and reading lesson. So we at Republic Schools have to do things differently than the state. It's not working as a state. Every piece of data I showed you, and then there's a whole report more of data, shows us that like that's not how you should teach reading. And everyone who's taught reading in this room knows that too. Like, ask a reading teacher. They'll tell you don't teach reading through worksheets. We have to do things better, and we've got to do it now. We can't wait till 2025. That's a crime. It's not okay. I also think that we should probably let Tennessee know that like that's also not okay. So maybe one of you can talk to Robbie for me. No, I'm just kidding. But like we can't wait. Like our kids need this now. So our answer is reading. It's every child, every day. No matter what, we're going to read, and kids are going to read, and they're going to love it because we're going to teach them how to love it. So, Kelly Gallagher is a great great reading expert author. I wanted you to read a section of this for this presentation, and then last night when I was trying to like print off the section, it's actually copyrighted, you can't print it. I was like, what is this? He writes a book called Read Aside. And it basically outlines everything that paragraph said in detail. It's such a good book. It's basically like saying what's wrong with America and how we teach reading. You should definitely check it out. Big summary is when you do anything but reading during reading class, it's Read Aside. It's basically like suicide for your like reading scores, reading like love, anything like that. You should definitely check it out. But my point, Read Aside. Yeah. My point to you is like if you're noticing a program that looks like the paragraph we just talked about or anything that we just said we don't want to be, if you're saying like, you know what, we don't have time for independent reading today, you're making the choice to deliberately kind of like get kids like disinvested with reading and also to fall further behind. Because there's only one proven way to teach kids how to read, and that's through practicing reading, which is through reading. This is just another part from the report that I thought was shocking and also just depressing. So that's not about being on grade level, it's like self-reporting about like do they feel as if they are a reader. And I think this is really troubling too because we want our kids to not only be excellent readers, but we want them to want to read, right?
Does the report show the correlation between this half and the half of the division?
Maybe. I'll send it out to you guys. It's really fascinating. So, reading at Republic schools. You've read the vision. Well, I'm just going to break this down for you in like super simple terms. Kids read in reading class at Republic schools. I've said that a couple times, but something that we should make sure that our teachers are really invested in. In middle schools, scholars read independently every day during a literacy class. During Unit 1 in LMS and UMS, we start with smaller chunks of independent reading time to build up to a full block. We are not starting with the full like 50-minute block because kids need to learn. We saw the data. Kids aren't ready for that necessarily coming in 5th grade. Some of them are, but not all of them, and we need to teach them how to learn how to like read and love reading and get in the zone and all those great things.
So just to your first point, kids read in reading class, so what would they do if they didn't? Yeah, you didn't miss that. Oh, I missed it.
Yeah, we talked. Well, can someone summarize for him what?
Yeah, I'd love to know.
Listen to their teacher talk.
Graphic organizers.
I miss bicycle.
Answer low-level recall questions that aren't textbook dependent.
Learn all about like the background of where that book came from and like all about the history behind the book.
Yeah.
Get bored.
Learn to hate reading.
I
Yeah.
can make this kid bored in 5 months.
People actually spend longer making kids bored than 5, so yeah. So we're going to build up to a full 45 minutes by the end of Unit 1, but that's just a note for you, and I want you to help me message this to teachers. It's not because we don't believe in independent reading. Like, we made the choice to not start off with like 45 minutes of independent reading on day 1, not because we don't believe in it, but because they have to be coached up to that level. And I think that new teachers could potentially struggle with that idea. Like, if we love independent reading, why aren't we just devoting a full block to it on day 1? So I'm going to need you to help me like message that over and over again, because eventually we do need to get there, and we want to get there by the end of Unit 1. So this is the structure for Unit 1 for the IR block. Kevin and I were like laughing about this. We even shouldn't call it an IR block. It's just reading. But because that's how we previously referred to it, that's how I'm referring to it now. So we're going to have a 3-minute lesson launch every single day during Unit 1, and then a model of a skill that's 7 minutes. It's in the unit plan. You'll see that when you check it out. Independent reading for 30 to 45 minutes. This could include mid-workshop teaching points, like quick like teacher jumping in and kind of redirecting students, but then pulling back out again to make sure that kids are reading and teachers are not talking. And then a wrap out or a readout on like how things went. Yep.
So modeling of skill and wrap up would be long
And then by 9 weeks in, we should be able to have students read for a full block, independently focused. So not just that you like have the time, but when you walk into classrooms, you should see evidence that kids are actually focused. So that's where like the leader part of this comes in. Like you're gonna have to coach your people up to be ready for that moment, and make sure that you're not just saying, well, she has the time, but like when you're gonna want to see evidence of kids being focused as they read.
I think we should begin to be this a little bit firmer. By 9 weeks in, students are reading the full block independently. They should be able to. It's almost a little bit too permissive. We should just do it.
Sometimes I don't know what it is. Well. Okay, so by Unit 2. Unit 2, there's going to be a launch. We're not going to do explicit modeling during the IR portion of the block because they will learn the same skill during the shared reading, and they basically will just need a reminder. So anything they practice on a shared text through close reading, they'll just be practicing independently. No need to remodel. And so you're going to have to wean your teachers off of that because teachers love modeling and love doing things other than reading sometimes because they're excited. It's not malicious. You're going to be independent reading the rest of the time, and there's conferences, data tracking, and guided reading happening, and then you're still going to do a readout. A readout's really important because that's when kids get to share out like things they've learned, and you get a quick accountability check of how your kids did during independent reading.
And can you say that again about why we're taking the modeling now?
Yeah. So the way the middle school structure is there's a the first block is basically, it's called like shared reading. Shared reading is like, there's a million terms in literacy. Shared reading is, you can think of as close reading. So it's when you're reading the same text. So in the past we've used novels. You certainly could use a novel. And together as a class, you're going through and closely like practicing a skill. During independent reading, you're going to take that same skill, but you're applying it to text that's on your level. Because during Unit 1, we're going to scaffold really thoughtfully. During Unit 2, we're not going to need to do 2 like rounds of modeling. We're also going to be better at modeling as teachers by that time. Our gut, like Arlen and our gut is that during Unit 1, teachers will probably struggle a little bit with modeling, so we'll need to coach them. So at Block 2, they're better at it, but our hope is by Unit 2, we're ready to go. All right. So, summary here, independent reading is something that is taught. Kids need to learn how to read. We teach them how to read. And we need to coach teachers around this. We cannot think of the IR block as something that just happens and we coach around the shared reading block. If that's the mindset we have, then we're actually fulfilling the mindset that we looked at earlier, that shared reading or reading that is not independent is more important than reading that is. I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's like hugely important for you to like self-reflect on. If you are only coaching during the shared reading portion of the literacy lesson, you are sending a message to your teachers that the independent reading is not as important. And so what we're going to focus on today is actually more the independent reading section because we need to start off strong as a group of leaders to coach our people up so they're invested in that time.
And I don't know if you made this point while I was in the question, but independent reading is where you're going to move kids as readers. Close reading is a great set of skills. It will not move kids nearly as quickly from level to level as sustained independent reading and guided reading.
Yeah. Some just like quick suggestions as we're going through today. I'm going to be on this tiny little poster I have. We're going to be talking, like, I would love it if, I'm going to have Ken get her. She's going to be like my person who writes down things that are literacy management. As you noted in the vision portion of all of this, there's a lot to manage in literacy, like a lot. And that's going to come up throughout our sessions, and I want us to just have a clear like frame of reference of things that like as a school team you need to decide like, oh, who owns that? Or like who's my leader there? So Ken Gutter, anytime you see that, I'm just going to have you pop up and write that down on the board. Okay? So that we make sure by Wednesday when we have time to talk about literacy management, we actually do, and we're covering all of our bases. I don't want you to walk out of here on Wednesday feeling like, did I miss something? Do I have to go through and like read that vision like another time? Though you should. And like find something, okay? The other thing I suggest you take notes on is like, then you're just going to want to take notes on content and like things that you're going to want to coach around. And then please continue to take notes on questions that you have, because you had a lot of questions during the vision. You're probably still going to have more, and I want to make sure that I answer them. They're also helpful for me to know what teachers might need help on. So think of that as well. All right, so our key levers for student growth during reading class. There are 4 that we're going to go through this week. These are the ones that I believe are the most important for moving students and their student growth. So the first is the launch and a clear model. We're specifically going to talk about the launch. So the lesson launch for a reading block. The next is conferencing. That's a one-on-one with kids. Data tracking. Hugely important for you as a leader to make sure that your teachers understand the data that they have access to and are using that on a regular basis. I'm also going to talk to you during that section about what you need to do to check in with your teachers. I believe that like if you use data in a really smart way, you're going to get exactly what Kevin said, which is a ton of student growth during independent reading time. But you have to be data focused.
Questions. Are like these the things that we want on the board? I know these are big umbrellas. Do you want like me writing down subparts of those things, or?
I think I want things like, I was thinking more like book system. Yeah, yeah. But if you have it, just get up and write it. We can always like clarify. Okay. So we're going to learn about IR blocks, data, conferencing, guided reading, and then tomorrow you're going to learn about modeling through Kevin. He's going to do a training on close reading. So that's where the modeling aspect of the launch comes in. So the launch. What is the launch? Read it for me, Helene.
What it does, introduces the teaching point and gets kids excited for the lesson. It must explicitly name the teaching point, which is the objective. Show kids why this teaching point is worth implementing. Give thinking job/thinking question. It should not model. The model is the model. But they blend together. It also should not be as silly or superficial. It matters that this is meaningful.
Okay, so a couple things I'm just going to point out to you that I see a lot of like where launches get tricky. They're actually pretty easy, but I think people either overthink them or use them as hooks. I think people who use them as hooks get here, that it's silly and superficial, and I think that what that does and why that's not okay is it prevents that like longer term investment in why reading is important.
This is, be specific, you're talking about the launch of the independent reading block.
Mm-hmm. I think you could apply this to any content area though, so that's my opinion. I also notice that often launches are very teacher-centric, so like previous stories about themselves, and that I don't see them connecting to like their student or talking about like a student and what they've experienced. I think that oftentimes when they're just about the teacher, they're not convincing, right? You're an adult who's a great reader. Like, why am I supposed to believe that like this story about you is real type thing? I see people talking about a time recently when they struggled with reading as an adult. I'm like, not believable. The model is the model. I put this in here because I see people modeling twice a lot during independent reading. Actually, they just repeat it twice. And that's just a waste of time. It's what we talked about earlier. It's too much talking during independent reading, and it needs to be focused on reading. Thinking job. Everyone clear on what that is? Kate, you want to explain thinking job?
And thinking, a thinking job is a teacher. Giving students like a specific thing that they should be focusing on. So naming for them at the beginning that like, this is what your job is during this task, and then coming back to it so that you're like closing that loop of like, so your thinking job was this, so show me a time which you did your job.
Is that what you modeled for us last week of like connect yourself to the character, like something? Okay.
Yep, it's basically like an action. I think of it a lot as an action item, but the action item should be aligned to the skill.
So a good example in close reading, which we'll go over tomorrow, is like, what's your thinking job when poem? When what you're reading the poem? The thinking job would be, what is the literal meaning of this poem? What is it happening in it? And then what's the deeper meaning? It's like a mnemonic for kids to keep in their minds as they're approaching a certain time.
So, how to launch. And so this is how like you might plan your launch, and in fact you're going to get a chance to plan some launches in just a few minutes. First, you're going to identify the teaching point for the day. So that's the objective, but it's phrased in a way that's, I think, more actionable than a traditional objective, and it's just more like student and teacher friendly. So you first identified it. It's all in the unit calendar, which is awesome, and so when you take a look at that, you're going to see all of those. Then you're going to think to yourself, what does this teaching point actually mean? You're going to want to put that in student-friendly language, but don't like dumb it. I don't mean like dumb down student-friendly language. I just mean like something that isn't too jargony. You know, they don't need to know like we're like close or you know.
As Lucy Kaufman says.
Yeah, yeah. You're not a professor. And then how will you accomplish this How will accomplishing this teaching point transform me as a reader, or my students as a reader? And again, I would push you to, as much as possible, make sure your teachers are talking about transforming your students. And so taking out the teacher example and more focusing on the kids. And then you have to say it like you believe it. Tone matters. This is probably my biggest point of feedback to a lot of our teachers. We need to get them out of directional voice. So that means like, today we are working on reading. In reading, we will, da 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 da. Like that sounds like you're giving directions. Like kids are not inspired when they're given directions. So we need to have a teacher voice, like a teaching voice or a content voice is what I call it with my teachers, and then a direction voice. And during the launch, it's a content voice. So that's something that we're going to coach around specifically. So, a potential teaching point could be getting in the zone. So if I were teaching that, I might start off, and I'm going to first name that for my people, my kids. So I'm going to name it. I'm going to show kids or tell kids why this teaching point is worth implementing, and then I'm going to give them a thinking job. So if my teaching point is getting in the zone, I might say something like, scholars, today we're going to get the chance to get in the zone with reading. Getting in the zone is hugely important for all of us as readers, because when you get in the zone, you actually understand more about your text. And when you understand more about your text, you enjoy your text even more. When you're in the zone, it almost is like an air conditioner is so loud, you can't hear anything but the buzz of that air conditioner, and all you're doing is like hearing and seeing the words come through your brain. By doing that, you're better understanding the text, and you're learning more about your characters. Today, as you read and as you get in the zone, I want you to think, what am I doing specifically that helps me stay in the zone? And if you fall out of the zone, I want you to think, what caused you to fall out of the zone? When we come back together, we're going to reflect on this and think about ways we can better get in the zone for tomorrow. So that was my launch. Really quick, right? What did you notice, or how did I explicitly name the teaching point?
Yes.
Okay. How did I show it was worth implementing? Or tell it was worth implementing? You can shout out.
You talked about how you understand your characters more and more.
Mm-hmm.
You tied it to what could have been like a goal for that time, like understanding the character.
Mm-hmm. And I think like self-feedback, I could go deeper, right?
Yeah, you also, this isn't one of the bullet points, but you like described what it should feel like,
Mm-hmm.
Which I think was really helpful for me as I was putting myself in a student.
Yeah.
What about kid-friendly language? You use adult-sized words. The talking about the air conditioner is a helpful kind of mental image for kids to hold.
Mm-hmm. I might think of it, and this might be something to write down, is like I usually teach my people the how, what, and why, just like any key point. So I'm going to think like, what is getting in the zone? It's when you in my head, it's like when you have like an air conditioner so loud that you don't hear anything else. when the music's bumping in a coffee shop, but it's just loud enough that you can't hear other conversations, and then you're in the zone. What is it? How do you do it? That's kind of where the model comes in. So that's why I didn't go into like how to actually get in the zone, and then why do we get in the zone? So how, what, and why. Cool. So you've seen the model. What's next? You are going to get the chance to right now plan your launch, and you're going to execute it in small groups. Okay? And then when we're in groups, you're going to either be getting or receiving feedback. At one point, you're going to get feedback. At some points, you're going to give it. So you're going to put on different hats throughout this practice. You're going to be in groups of 3. One person is going to be the teacher. Everybody here is a teacher, but you know what I mean. One person is the teacher. They're going to execute the launch. The other person in that group is a teacher coach. So that's like someone who'd be like an AP or a dean who's in the classroom. And so they're going to give feedback to the launch. I would like to push you to try to give live feedback. So like whisper in feedback. I know that's like hard and sometimes uncomfortable, but I think it's good practice for all of us as coaches, especially if we want to make changes quickly. And then we're going to have a coach's coach. So that person is going to think like, hey, were there moments as a coach that you could have been a little bit more aggressive or could have said something a little bit more clearly for your teacher so they'd understand.
I'll be there too, so we'll be the coaches.
We're going to, yeah. And then Robbie is going to coach us.
And then God will coach
So that's how the practice is going to work. And we're going to spend 5 minutes independently first planning your launch. So the first launch is getting in the zone. And so you can either use my script or use what I did, or you can like ad-lib and do it on your own. Again, you're thinking, what does that teaching point mean? How will accomplishing it transform your students? And then you're going to think about how you're going to say it. So let's do 5 minutes of silent planning. I think I have timing down right, but you never know with practice. So, well, I just see what you think and tell me if you think like, oh, people seem to be getting it. Let's move on.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know. word practicing. Thinking job is like what you want them to think about getting into.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he said it's over. 30 seconds. If you finish, you might just want to be like playing it in your head. What's your question? The whole group.
Keep wanting to get to how, but that is modeling.
It's modeling.
Yeah, so just the what and the why.
We're going to do modeling week tomorrow. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, timer went off. We're going to go with what you have for now. Obviously, like, we want teachers to spend more than 5 minutes planning their lunch. But for the sake of time and practice, we're going to just do 5 minutes. A couple things. I didn't point this out in the beginning, but I just want to tell you. I put, like, bullet points on this document. It's there to help you. So during the lunch, the things that you're thinking about as you plan it and the things that I'd like you to ideally coach around. So if I were to give myself feedback, I didn't actually CFU the thinking job. I didn't say, Sarah, what are we thinking about today as we're reading? Ryan, can you tell me back that one more time for our 5th graders especially who may struggle with like even listening to a 3-minute lunch? Those are things you're going to want to coach around. Groups of 3, go ahead and stand up. Find your group of 3. Get in your groups, 30 seconds. And identify the teacher, the coach, and the coach. 20 seconds, you should be in your groups.